right, guys. This one's a bit corny, so like, hold on to your horses. The port and my vision to the country for the country. In the previous videos, I told you like I wrote like 5 notes on my way from the mountains down to like the actual city. Spent like 5 days with my dad. It was one of those kind of like recollecting my thoughts, kind of like seeing things from a different perspective, all that good shit. It was a while back though. It's like now I don't think I have to go to the mountains to do that, but I go to the mountains just because I kind of like it's just a different vibe. So the port and my vision for the country. Just thinking the machines were beautiful and how it would look beautifully if the view was considered for driving cars. Uh, as I was reading this, so here it is, the port and my vision for the country, just thinking how the machines were beautiful and how it would look beautifully if the views were considered for driving cars. In all honesty, man, I like urbanization in a way. It's like I'm a big fan of like factories. I'm a big fan of machines. Two things came to mind right now. One is on our way to I think somewhere in Dubai, and I got to see the airport fully lit in the middle of the night. I'm thinking we are going to the airport. I got to see the airport fully lit in the middle of the night, and basically just like a whole lot of shit that kind of like come with airports, right? It's like there's whole I don't know, there are cranes and there are like random sized planes and all that shit. It really looks like a fucking toy from afar. And in all honesty, I think that's kind of like a prideful view, activity, work functionality, and just kind of like how we're kind of like existing within the how how we build our own like kind of like stuff. Now it's funny because like Lego does that like a lot more pridefully because there are like designers that just they're artists that just design Legos and they kind of like design shit with Legos and they do all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so the second thing that came to mind is one time I was driving back in Spain. I wasn't the one driving, my cousin was. God rest his soul. He's alive. We just kind of like don't speak. But like back in the day when whoever I was back then and whoever he was back then got along. Now we don't seem to kind of like have anything to talk about. So it's interesting. But we're driving back from south of Spain and we passed by this factory. And I want you to imagine driving at 120 kilometers per hour. And we're driving past the factory, and it took like a minute and a half for the factory to like for us to kind of like go from one side to another. Granted, we weren't driving sideways, we were just kind of like going around it until like we got to the other side of the mountain because the factory was like on one side of the mountain. Super fucking gorgeous. Super gorgeous. And factories for me are a lot more kind of like it's funny because right now I'm a software engineer. But factories for me are very much like there's a sex appeal to them because there are multiple parts. Again, like same with the airport, there are multiple parts. And the whole essence of the node is like going down and seeing the port of Lebanon. And remember, like I think 4 years ago or something like this, within that range, 3 years ago, maybe 2021, we actually got bombed. No, there was an explosion at the port, and all the port was kind of like destroyed, and a lot of people lost their lives. And so they built a makeshift port on the other side that kind of looks a lot more legit, simply because it wasn't kind of patched up. But anyways, back to the factory. So the factory had silos, had warehouses, had little like ramps in different places. It was just like a beautiful design, and it was a meat factory. It was a factory for some like meat brand that does jamon in all ways, and it's just kind of like you can see where there is the machinery, and it seems like something enters from one side and another thing comes from the other. And there are machinery, there are pipes, and there are silos, and there are like all kinds of like connections, and there's steam coming from a couple of different places. It was just simply gorgeous. And in a way, the aesthetic behind the whole, forget what happens in the factory, I have no fucking idea. But just like being able to kind of like look at something that was constructed for a certain purpose. was built for a certain purpose, has a certain majesticness to it. It kind of feels like when we actually give attention to the details, and even from a great perspective, like a factory that took like 2 minutes for us to not see anymore as we're going around the mountain 120 kilometers per hour. It was huge. Like it literally, I'm sure it spread for at least like a kilometer and a half. The actual factory that just kind of like had that much distance from one side to another. Super massive, super fucking gorgeous, super fucking beautiful. And the idea is just well, maybe I'm considering urban architecture or something like this, or the urbanization and how basically like different parts of the city serve different purposes. But it feels like all of these are capitalized as a part of what we're doing. And to reflect back on how I actually like we were driving and it was the end of a highway where you kind of do a U-turn to start entering into the city. Felt like we're going, that was the port in front of us. And it looked so beautiful, maybe because I was high. What I remember specifically, like those are things that represent the health of our economy, the health of our country. And I have a strong connection when it comes, I have a strong built-in connection when it comes to like how society operates versus how its economy is with its economy. And on the other side, basically, our, I don't want to say governmental structure, but there's a certain dynamic that happens between like the social aspect, which is government maybe, and the economical aspect, which is entities. Remember, like a company is basically like, I was reading one paper once, and they were discussing just like if Peugeot's CEO was the owner was to die or the CEO was to die, Peugeot would still go on, even though at one point in life it was basically created. But ultimately, what happens is like once it develops its own balance, that balance is basically society with culture and with the economy. And let's say society is the government, the economy is the businesses, and basically culture is basically the people and the creativity that or the art or just kind of like I don't want to say traditions because I think culture and traditions are two different things, but it's the way of life, the lifestyle, right? Whether it is whatever. There are many ways people choose to live, and the world is just fucking massive. Like I've traveled around Africa and Europe, and it's just like very. The fascinating part is how kind of like unique every single like culture reflects on its economy, even though as of recent, all societies are trying to look the same. But anyways, it's just kind of like the aesthetic of whatever we do, and kind of like the feng shui maybe of it, or how it harmonizes with our surroundings. Maybe the visuals, maybe the sounds, maybe the like the texture, the differences in landscape, where we actually construct and how these things kind of like express themselves to even the passerbys, like the car that we're passing. And I don't know, I was just imagining how like I was just imagining how these things, I don't know, maybe just in Lebanon, but they're not really considered as as more than whatever they produce. They're not really considered from a placement perspective how they're reflecting on how the country looks. And oh, here basically, if the view, uh, it would look beautifully if the view was considered for the driving cars, because ultimately, like people basically pass through next to these things all the fucking time. And just imagine yourself passing next to the Disney World, you feel magical, right? But if you're passing by a factory, that's not the feeling you get. But again, that's what I got from that factory in Spain, simply because it's just kind of like it was very aesthetic. Aesthetic is the word to use. And maybe a big part of me was thinking the investments that I would do in the future and how they would be actually like, and what are the things, what are the main points I would want to check on the list, or like, is this something investable or something, or like considered as support? Because my vision includes like people kind of like using my platform in order for them to kind of like explore how they would actually evolve and grow and interact. And it's just like fun stuff to consider, I guess, just kind of like looking at the city from a different view and altering your reality in a way that includes a lot more than what already exists, and it's just like increasing your like periphery or something like this, or field of vision. It's a video.